Good morning, listeners. My name is Christian.
And I'm Josiah, and this is the Morning Ponderings podcast.
A podcast where we explore the possibilities allotted to us by our limited knowledge and understanding. Yeah, I think keeping it to a short, simple one is good for this one.
Yeah, sure, that works.
Well, how are you, Josiah?
I have crippling depression. How are you?
Well, that sounds just like good old time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's wonderful. I need to make an appointment for a psychiatrist so that I can get some medicine. But on the bright side, it's fueled my art, and I have written some short stories, so...
There you go.
How are you doing?
It's crazy how, like, some of the most... what's the word I'm looking for? Like gripping and visceral art can be generated from some of the more dark emotions. Like, what is it about the human psyche that craves just dark things? I don't know. But I mean,
is that the topic you want to do today?
Oh no. I mean, maybe. I was thinking maybe, I don't know, talk about communism.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you got a lot to say about that. But
yeah. I mean, there is an answer to that, and it's that we have a survival instinct in us. The reason that we have thoughts about our failures and things that went wrong in our life, but we rarely think about the things that went right in our life, is because we have a survival instinct in our brain to constantly think about avoiding the bad things. But it's not helpful because we don't live in a situation where we need those survival instincts. So instead we just get anxiety.
I also wonder to what extent it's a matter of, man, I want to avoid basically living in the Matrix, like within a little bubble where the world's perfect and all the problems are small. And occasionally I feel like I need to understand, I need to look outward and be like, oh, the world is actually not all rainbows and sunshine. So I don't know. I wonder to what extent it is. We know based on studies, like you said, that it is a survival instinct in part, but I wonder to what extent, or possibly in whole, but I wonder to what extent it's almost oh, I need to feel something. And so we go searching for that visceral feeling.
I don't know. I was trying to tell my therapist about it. There's this album called Everywhere at the End of Time by an artist named... his moniker is The Caretaker. The actual artist's name is James Leland Kirby. It is a 6.5 hour long mix of, he basically, he does, it's technically vaporwave. It doesn't sound like typical vaporwave because of the records that he uses, but he manipulates other music basically to create the sounds that he wants, and it's supposed to take you through all of the stages of Alzheimer's. Emotionally, mentally, it's like the music itself has Alzheimer's. And so it starts out kind of just staticky, like a record's being played on a dirty needle, and then it slowly turns into noise music, which is something that most people wouldn't consider music, because it's not typically structured like music. But it really is actually samples of records just strung out over like 1 minute could become 30 minutes or something like that. And then there's tracks layered, and he does other there's a lot of art in it. It's not just a guy copy and pasting stuff. There's a lot of technique that goes into that stuff.
I feel like I might have heard this, based on the description you're giving it. I feel like I might have heard snippets of this in my humanities of the arts class in college several years ago. I remember.
Yeah, it's not It's not unpopular, and it was a project that he did for several years. He would release one part of the album a year. It was one
Hmm.
stage per year for 6 years. And the idea was like you would listen to it and then you would go away for a year, and the next time you visited it, it got worse. Kind of
Hmm.
like a sick loved one that you don't visit in the hospital often enough.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was kind of the. So he also did that to be like oppressively depressing.
Hmm.
Um, the first time I listened to it, I cried like 4 times. But now I actually listen to it, and I was telling my therapist that for some reason it makes me feel better sometimes when I'm going through existential horror.
Hmm.
Um, because I don't know, I guess something about it makes me feel less alone, or like there's something beautiful in it, even like in the end. I don't know.
Hmm.
So sometimes it does make us feel better.
Right.
But if you want to feel worse, we can talk about communism and how we're all exploited and the world is terrible.
Well, I mean, that's just a reality that we're facing every day at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's like the elephant in the
Um,
room that nobody wants to talk about. Well, lots of people are starting to talk about it, so it's a good thing, but lots of people are talking, but not a lot of people are listening, unfortunately. So
yeah,
we want to add to the noise.
sure, why not? What's another dude talking about the world's problems on a podcast? Yeah, so essentially, like one of the things about communism is that it's not an authoritarian, like political philosophy.
Hmm.
That gets misconstrued often because of countries like in South America that democratically voted for a communist economy, and then the CIA assassinated whatever the elected leader was and this is like all declassified like stuff from the government that like they were forced to declassify, but they also try to keep it as deep as they can
By the
because they don't
way,
want.
could you send me like if there's links to this information, could you send that to me and I could like put it in the description of the episode?
I'll try to find it, yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, like the CIA basically putting dictators into South American countries.
Mm.
There was also like dictators who put themselves into power, like Joseph Stalin, who, not that Lenin's philosophy was necessarily perfect, but Lenin was trying and Stalin was not.
Hmm.
But even then, the USSR actually wasn't as bad as uh, people said it was. It was bad, but like I don't know. There was a lot of benefits to it, and they basically went from a reverse agrarian society into like a space age country in like 40 years or something like that, or
Hmm.
like 50, 60 years. So like something about it worked, but
Gotcha.
essentially it's just the idea that all people, any system where capitalism is the dominant economic philosophy is going to be a system where everybody in almost everybody in the country is oppressed. Like if you think about America, there's a few people that you can think of that have like almost all of the money. Like they won at Monopoly and they're hogging all the spots on the, which Monopoly was also created as a criticism of capitalism because it's actually how it works.
Hmm.
And they're hogging all the spaces so that nobody else can get any spaces to make more money. And then you end up with like 100 something people owning more than half of the world's wealth. And the point of like most communists these days aren't like we need a wealth cap necessarily. it's just more like that's unnecessary. You don't need that much money.
Mm,
And there are people that actually do need the money. So communism is actually the ultimate goal would be like a classless, stateless society, also moneyless,
mm.
because which is something that like people don't realize, but a lot of Americans can get behind that. Like a lot of rural towns where you trade a little bit of food for some services or something like that. Like you give your neighbor a 6 pack of beer for him to fix your car. Like that's actually communism.
Hmm.
That's just people supporting each other because we're all people in this world and we see each other as humans and we're doing something for each other and we give each other something and it doesn't have like a direct monetary like replacement value on that, but
Right. Something that
we
like
feel okay with it.
something that I've found problematic is like how do we even find a solution to like the issue of in capitalism, uh like if one person manages toward literally all the wealth, there's no more like money for anyone else to use. My neighbor can still come like shovel my driveway. I can still watch their dog. Exchange of value can still happen. So it's like money, like tokens, the tokens of money, currency is separate from the value of services, especially. And it just feels like that's a fundamental flaw because it's like if we're putting all of our value, if we put more value in currency than in the actual things being exchanged, be it goods or services, then one person can get all of the value and that almost renders everything else valueless, but it's not necessarily valueless. And I don't know, it creates
But
this
yeah, no.
needless, like you were saying, needless classes at that point.
There's a creator on TikTok who made me aware of this named Your Summer Camp Crush.
I think you've talked about her
And
before.
yeah, she's a very educational person. She has a lot of good information on her channel and also boosting female creators. Um, but she also genderqueer creators. I think that in her bio she has she they pronouns in there.
Hmm.
But she made me aware of the fact that there's like this myth that the barter system has always been the thing, and money was basically made to replace the barter system. Is that something that like you understood about economics?
Um, I would like I don't know if I put enough like direct thought at it, but I would say that that's a pretty accurate like assumption that I might make on the day to day.
Yeah, and so that was like, and I'm realizing that I've been speaking very monotone this whole time. So let's try some voice fluctuations. Um, so like the barter, that's what I always thought. Like it just made sense. Like, oh, we needed some way to determine value for these goods that were being imported from other countries. Gold had value inherently with like everybody, and like silver and stuff like that. So we started doing direct transactions. But apparently, for a really long time, like most of human history, which includes like history that hasn't been directly recorded, but from what anthropologists can gather,
Hmm.
we used more of like a debt system, but it wasn't like an American exploitative debt system. It was like in the modern day, it would look like your neighbor fixes your car, and you don't have anything to give him at that moment, but he knows that you know how to uh, put up drywall, and he has a crack in his wall that he doesn't feel like dealing with it right now, but in like 6 months or something like that, he'll be like, "Hey, can you help me with my wall?" And then you'll be like, "Yeah, sure." And that's kind of how the debt system worked. You just like do stuff for each other. Back then, it was more like you need a chair, and you're like the village farmer, and your crops will be ready in like 3 months.
Mm.
And so you get the chair, and then because that person provided the service to you, you just kind of give them some food without doing the debt thing on them. but it also isn't like so it I don't know, it kind of reminds me of how me and my friends operate, which is I'm not necessarily keeping receipts of like how much money we spend on each other. It's just like sometimes you pay for stuff, sometimes I pay for stuff, and it kind of evens out in the end.
Mhm. I feel like a lot of what maybe is a barrier to people understanding how communism can work is environments. Like in the United States, especially, our environment is very individualistic and very isolating, such that that kind of an interaction is in some cases hard to imagine. It's like, well, I don't want to engage with my neighbor and do stuff with them. I just want to live my own life and have money that I can spend and not have to minimize human contact. And maybe that's just what I experience. Like it just feels like introversion is on the rise in a lot of, like, I don't know if like that would be necessarily the correct term for it, but people want less and less contact with other people, it feels like.
Yeah.
And I wonder to what extent like that is a manipulation of the populace and the culture in order to try and specifically combat communism.
Yeah, individualism is actually like a philosophy that is the destruction of the individual. Like it's weird, but from like I've done analysis on this, and like the only way to really achieve the ideals of individualism is through collectivism, because individualism essentially encourages us to fight for ourselves. So when you go to your neighbor, you expect them to have a focus on themselves, and you're worried that you're going to ask for too much and maybe get on their bad side or something like that.
Mm,
And you don't expect them to have an attitude. Well, maybe some people do. Like my neighbor Randy is great, but um, you expect people to have that individualistic attitude, and you don't expect talking to them to be something that goes over well. So instead, you try to do it yourself. It also results in stuff like you behaving in that way, like you want to keep as much money as you can because you have to save for a kid's college fund because college is way too expensive, or
mm,
save for emergencies because we have to pay for medical emergencies in America. The
yep.
whole system is basically built to make us fight each other. And then sometimes they explicitly try to make us fight each other with like political issues,
Mm,
like turning people in the lower class against each other. All of those things kind of try to keep us from attaining class consciousness, which is the word for when you realize that you are always being exploited by pretty much everybody in power,
mm,
including, your boss may be a good guy, but the system that you are a part of is an exploitative one. And,
mm.
maybe your boss is cool, but the system that goes up to the top is one that puts you unnecessarily at disadvantage.
Yeah. This might put things in like some hot water, but I when you say that, I immediately think of like how a cop might be a good person, but they're in a system where they are required to enforce laws that could be just straight up evil. And oftentimes, because of the exploitation that happens and that they are under themselves, they will follow through on enforcing evil laws because otherwise, how are they going to feed their family? How are they going to keep their job? Like, I feel like that's from what I understand. I don't know a whole lot about the whole idea of like ACAB, but I feel like that's kind of at the root of the idea of ACAB of like it's not necessarily the police being amoral people, it's the police being in a system and oftentimes in a culture that makes them a danger and a threat to very particular people who are being oftentimes targeted by people in power. Am I understanding that correctly? Is that, would you
Uh,
say if that's a
That's not
Good
an
parallel.
unfair way to phrase it. I think that one of the things with that is like the defund the police. Sometimes leftists are really bad at branding things. Like defund the police, technically correct. And if you're somebody who takes 5 minutes to Google things, then you'll realize that defunding the police doesn't actually mean abolishing the entire police force. The central tenets of defund the police are more like demilitarize the police because
Hmm.
the police, like our police forces in big cities, could literally destroy armies in smaller nations. Like that's how powerful they are,
Hmm.
and it's unnecessary. Most police interventions don't even require a gun. They don't even require a taser. So the idea of the police needing to be a literal occupying military force is ridiculous.
Yeah. I feel like
So
maybe
one of
even
the
a
tenets
more
is like,
accurate but less catchy phrase might be diversify emergency responses, because it feels like in a lot of situations we're trying to use a hammer for as a solution to literally everything. It's like, oh, this light bulb needs to be screwed in. We'll hit it with a hammer. Oh, this nail needs to be driven down. Well, okay, in this case, it actually works. Hit it with a hammer. Oh, this screw needs to go in. We'll just hit it with a hammer. Oh, the toilet paper roll needs exchanged out. Oh, we're just gonna hit that with a hammer. It feels like that's the tendency, and the push for defund the police is, hey, let's like let's get some more resources so that we're not hitting everything with a hammer and possibly causing more damage than good.
yeah. I think one guy on YouTube who I listen to named Bo of the Fifth Column, he basically said the only time that you should call the police is if the solution that you need is a gun, because that's what they're bringing to the table. They're bringing a gun, and they may not use it 80, 70% of the time, whatever it is, um, depending on where you live and who you are calling the police. Um, but the solution that they're bringing to the table is that they have the monopoly on violence in that situation. They are allowed to shoot. Um, they have more scrutiny than James Bond's License to Kill, but they get away with a lot because
Mm.
of police fraternities, like social structures. So if you need somebody with a gun to stop something, then that's when you call the police. If you don't need somebody with a gun, you don't need to call the police.
So
That's one of, you kind of started hitting on it. One of the
yeah.
sort of things that we talk about is like 10% of police work requires a gun. So maybe 10% of our police force should actually have like lethal weapons, and they're only there for like SWAT team stuff, like somebody's holding a hostage in a building, which has happened on my street twice. It's weird that it's happened 2 times.
Hmm.
Those situations where you do need somebody with a gun, you have somebody with a gun. The rest of the times, you have people who are trained in other skills like diplomacy, being able to talk down different situations, because they do a lot of like settling property disputes and stuff, like stuff that does not require them to bring a gun,
Hmm.
but they do because it's on their person. Yeah, also like police propaganda movies and stuff like that, where police officers just get to shoot things, and that's what makes kids want to grow up and be cops, and then they don't really realize that they've been kind of manipulated into wanting to be like vigilantes, essentially. Yeah, it's a problem,
Let's
and you were kind of hitting on the
yeah,
solution there.
yeah. I think we've veered a little bit. I think I went to make like a comparison and we kind of made a topic out of it. Um,
This is all communism to me.
oh, okay. Well, that works out then. But because we have roughly 15 minutes left, uh, it's quite a big topic to try and tackle in what little time we do. I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about it again sometime or make a
I feel like,
series,
yeah, we're
something
just
more
kind of
structured.
covering the basics,
Um, but
which
I
is what I'm
know
good for. I'm good
there's a
for the
lot.
basics. I'm not an academic.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. What'd you say?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was saying, we're just kind of covering the basics, which is what I'm good for. I'm not an academic in this field.
Gotcha. So we have about 15 minutes left. And one of the things that I think would be good to touch on, which has probably been touched on 100,000 times by other people, but I mean, could stand to be touched on more apparently because there's still a lot of fear. We talked a little bit earlier about people in power pitting the lower class against itself. And I feel like one of the ways that manifests is people just having an outright fear of communists. Like, it's interesting to me that I've spoken with certain people in my life in the religious community, and they have shown greater concern when I tell them I associate with somebody who's openly a communist, namely you, Josiah, than they have with me saying I've associated with hundreds of atheists. And that just kind of boggles my mind. It's like, especially in the religious circle, you would think like associating with atheists would be a greater concern because that's like playing, like messing around and putting at risk like salvation and stuff like that. But there's this like extreme fear and like, I don't know, like how to put it, but there's this extreme like repulsion towards communism among a lot of people that I know personally. And I want to like, I feel like I have a surface level understanding as to why that is. Namely, there's this assumption that anytime there is communism, there's also a dictatorship, which we kind of touched on a little bit with like people making that assumption that it's hand in hand with authoritarianism, just because they look at some examples that might have been the result of manipulation and other examples that just are the loudest people in the room. And then on the other hand, there's this idea of people being very protective of their private property, which I actually saw a TikTok a while ago about the difference between private property and personal property, but I've forgotten some of those details. But like how much, maybe you can expand on that, and maybe what other elements have you found that makes people so afraid of this idea of communism?
I think if you want to talk about Christians specifically, there's a lot of rhetoric that communism is specifically out to destroy Christianity. To be fair, communism is generally an anti-religion philosophy, but it's not anti-religion in the same way that a religious person is anti-atheist, where they want to abolish all atheists. Anti-religion in this context means that religion has no power over people, like no social power, no political power. It doesn't mean that people can't believe what they want to believe, because communism at the end of the day is essentially like the ultimate form of democracy. Like you get, like we haven't even talked about like worker cooperatives, democratic workplaces. That's one of the things that I push for that I think would make our country a fairer and freer society. But stuff like that is all meant for freedom and democracy and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's an emphasis on freedom of religion and freedom from religion.
Yeah, it's that the church doesn't have any power over the state. I think that so communism has like multiple stages normally, unless you're anarchist and you want to just like destroy it all and take us back to the ultimate end goal of communism, which is where there is no state. The idea that religion doesn't have the ability to control people, because some people find value in their religion, and I totally get that. I understand. But a church can very easily turn into a sort of any time somebody claims to have the correct view on life, their clique or their group or whatever starts to treat other people differently, almost like they're less than. Even though the tenets of Christianity would be like nobody is less than anybody else.
Right.
That's how people get treated. You and me have both seen that. And so there's like a fear that communists are the same way. And at the end of the day, communists just want everybody to be free. That's the goal. And also, communism isn't like we don't have a Bible. Like, we know that Marx was anti Semitic and also a racist. He's not Jesus or anything like that. He had some good things to add to the conversation on class consciousness, and it's, for a lot of people worth reading the Communist Manifesto. But at the end of the day, it's an evolving economic philosophy that has to stay updated with our current society. So the views kind of change. Like, the overall tenets of it are the same, but the views change. And I
Hmm.
think that it's the difference between that fluidity and the rigidity of something like Christianity that causes the fear, because they don't understand. They haven't taken the time to talk to a communist or listen if they have taken the time to talk to a communist. And a lot of that is
Hmm.
because of the Red Scare, and a lot of it is just fears over like anti-religion uh, rhetoric in communist circles. So that's kind of where I'd see that coming from, but also that's my rebuttal to it as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting, like the branding bit, like you mentioned, because it might be it's hard. Branding is a difficult thing because you want something that's short and catchy, but oftentimes it's at the cost of nuance. Because like the idea of it being of communism being anti-religion, like that's a nice headline to throw up there to scare a bunch of religious people. Whereas if it's more true to freedom of and freedom from religion, like that's like the actual nuanced phrase. Like that will probably still cause some concern in some people, but a lot of other people who, I don't know, like I feel like the amount of people that would be concerned would be lessened to a large degree. Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah, I think it's like it's also very easy to be a Christian communist. Like, I actually don't understand being a capitalist Christian
Hmm.
if you like read the Bible. But you're right. I think that you're right about like the nuance being lost in that conversation. Part of the problem is that you need like, if you're talking about branding, you need like a short phrase that gets your point across, but also makes like a big punch.
Hmm.
Like, if you think about a phrase like "Make America Great Again," which won a certain idiot an entire presidency for 4 years, um, you you could immediately be like, again,
Hmm.
and then kind of realize what he means by that. But also, like, it makes people feel good inside. Some people feel good inside, and it is like the one thing that he was good at was branding and getting like a brand out there.
Hmm.
But also the thing that he's not good at is keeping a brand alive. If you look at the line of Trump products that have all failed, and now Republicans are kind of turning away from Donald Trump because he hates everybody.
Hmm.
But stuff like that, like, they like, somehow conservatives always get like this branding thing right, and to me that's the reason that we don't have more like rural communists who realize that their way of living is actually a lot closer to communism than like anybody's ever gotten. Like, communists, there's a reason that communists are now like moving out to the country to like start farms and stuff like that, because that they get to like, it sucks in America because America's bad to farmers. Like,
Hmm.
we should take care of the people that grow our food, but we don't. But yeah, it's because in that country life you live in the communal way, in the sort of collectivist mindset, and people like that. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah. Actually, when I did a ride, this just reminded something in me. When I did a ride along with a state trooper, he took me out to like a town way out in the sticks, and he just kind of was like, "Yeah, I'm just out here to get something for lunch. The people out here kind of take care of their own problems. They don't really need the police force here." And I was like, "Oh, Interesting. And so that was a good route to plant for my anti-police rhetoric.
Hmm.
But the idea that like they don't like cultures don't actually need a police force necessarily. They just
Hmm.
need to be like adults or whatever.
A community that's actually engaged.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
But there was probably also some racism in there. Like, this is an all white community. They're fine. But I didn't have the awareness at the time to analyze anything like that or look around and check what everybody looked like there.
So here's a ridiculous question to kind of end on. But something that I've been taking note of, and I think a lot of other people have been taking note of, is that a lot of the Republicans in power in the media seem to suddenly be totally fine with communism so long as it's a conservative Christian Putin. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, are they referring to it as communism? Because I want to be clear, Putin is a fascist.
Mm-hmm.
There's no communism left in Russia. They're
Well,
controlled by a neo oligarchy, and they're largely like, if anything, like a state capitalist system where the
mm,
capitalist companies have to kowtow to the people in power. But yeah, no, they're okay with Putin because he's a Eastern Orthodox, strong male, misogynist, racist leader, and it's just so weird that like those qualities are what some people look for in their hero. Like he's a bad person. Like I don't think that
obviously.
most people on the right know that
I would hope,
he's like
obviously, but
killed
obviously not.
people. Yeah, I don't think that most people on the right realize that he's had journalists killed for just saying bad stuff about him, and which is why, hey, I'm on Russia's side. I'm kidding. I'm on Ukraine's side.
Yeah,
Russia can get out of there.
seriously.
But yeah, I don't know. It is really weird, and honestly, that's one of the reasons that I got pushed away from conservatism is because I did self reflection and I was like, oh, this is a contradiction. I need to deal with this. And when I dealt with it, I was like, well, there's obviously a right side to this.
Mm,
The
mm-hmm.
other side is the wrong side. And I came out on the left. That basically through the process of picking the right side
Mm.
on those issues.
Yeah, it's it boggles my mind. I don't know what else to say.
No, it's okay.
But
I can talk
that makes
about
sense.
like other
I feel
things in the
like
future, more
other
economic stuff.
people I don't know, maybe I'm just like mixing up more distant memories with more recent memories, but it feels like there's still people that like will point to Russia as like an example of what communism leads to. And so thanks for the clarification that that is not like Russia is not right now a communist country by any means.
Yeah,
And
it really hasn't been since like Gorbachev was in power,
granted, I could
which
still
a
see
lot of
people
Russians
saying
will
like, yeah,
say.
it's not communist now, but it needed the communism to become what it is. What would you say to that?
No, it needed capitalism to become what it was. That's basically what Gorbachev did. Started like introducing capitalism into the country. And I've talked to some Russians, not a lot, but a couple, and they basically see that as the decline of Russia, as when things started getting worse for all of the average people there.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, it was capitalism that made Russia the way it is.
Hmm.
Listen, money corrupts people. For whatever reason, we let those fake little pieces of paper that literally have no value control so much and create so much suffering. And I don't know. The thing that I like to break out, like just as like a little final thing, like the thing that I like to talk about is, especially with Christians, like we can let's put aside the titles right now that we assign to our economic philosophies, and let's just address the fact that 10,000 children die of starvation every day. This is
Hmm.
including all of your feed the world stuff that Christians do.
And that's just the
all of the
children. It boggles my
charities.
mind
Yeah,
that we
that's
have
just
to
the children.
say,
It's like 30,000 people.
it boggles my mind that we have to specify children, because when you're talking to Christians and you say adults, like the immediate assumption that can tend to go to is like, oh, well, they probably did something to deserve it. Oh, well, it's
Exactly, yeah.
probably was within their power to not end up that way. So we have to specify children for there to be any sympathy. And that boggles my mind.
Yeah,
But that's just a side
that's
note.
exactly why I do that. Because it is like 30,000. To me, the idea of anybody in in this economy, in this world where we have more than enough food for everybody and more than enough houses for everybody, and like the idea that anybody could die of starvation or be due to the elements because they didn't have a house, is offensive. It's ridiculous. But I always like to lead with that, and I'm like, do you think that there needs to be a solution to this? And then we can get into a conversation of how we don't even grow money, or we, we. I wish we grew money. Sometimes I could plant a money tree. We don't grow food to like feed people. We grow food to make money. Like that's why we create food.
Mm.
The idea that like we can't even provide the most basic food for people, like the stuff that's the cheapest and easiest to make, the stuff that you can survive off of, is like, I don't know. To me, it when you break it down like that, it's like we can do all this charity work, but at the end of the day, it's really complicated, and there's still 10,000 children dying literally every day of starvation.
Mm-hmm.
Could we just stop all this complicated mess and feed them, please? Like that's, I don't know. To me, it gets really emotional when I start talking
Seriously.
about stuff like that because I hate it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like human death.
I feel like something like you said, well, I don't know if you said, I can't remember, but something that I heard again and again is like, oh, well, it should be the church's responsibility, the community's responsibility, not the government's responsibility, which is actually kind of communist. But like, I look at that and I'm like, well, I live on the Bible Belt, and there's a church, like there's so many churches. They probably outnumber any other kind of business in the city that I presently live in. And we still have major problems, major poverty problems, major racism problems, major issues all over the place. And if it was enough, if the church was enough, then this would probably be like the greatest city in the world, but it's not.
Yeah. I think my parents had that response to me, and my response was, well, then why don't they do it? Like, do it. You have the money and the resources. Where is all that money? Like in Joel Osteen's strip mall of a mansion that he lives in, like literally a third of the world is Christian or goes to church. That is a third of the world's money, and that includes some very rich people. Just do it, feed people. But we don't, because it's not, at the end of the day, that response isn't about helping people. It's about, I don't want to deal with this problem because this is horrifying to me. It is horrifying, and people don't want to deal with it. And honestly, I understand that. I don't like to think about it either. But the more people that think about it, the more likely it is that we actually get to do something about it. So that's why I obnoxiously spread rhetoric and people get annoyed with
it.
Me.
There's an even more disturbing part of it, and that is for a lot of Christians that I know, like you don't deserve food if you're not worthy of it. Like if you haven't worked for it. Like there is this mentality of like you have to provide a certain amount of value to the economy to deserve food, to deserve not to starve to death. And that's just a crazy, like it does not seem like a very Christian mindset, quite frankly. But apparently it's a common one.
It's it's an American mindset, and it's unfortunate, and it's where a lot of communists will draw the line in a conversation and be like, okay, apparently you just don't see some other people as being as human as you are, and so we can finish this conversation because you have angered me and I don't want to get an assault charge today, so we are gonna finish this out.
Yeah. Well, my wife
Yeah.
just texted me, so I probably gotta head. So we can do a quick
All
outro, or
right.
is there anything else you want to share?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. I appreciate you letting me rant for a little bit there.
Yeah, man.
Maybe we can have a conversation about more of the economic stuff like worker co-ops and the sort of positive stuff that could be implemented. But yeah, that's sort of a basic lesson in class consciousness and how we're all being exploited. And the more people that know that, the more
Yeah.
likely we are to be able to fix this up.
So for listeners, there will be a part 2 of the last episode coming after this episode. So if there's a part 2 to this episode, it'll come after that episode. It's going to get a little wonky with the order of things, but Micah was suffering from some allergies, so it's going the way it is. All right. So where can people find you?
You can find me at Something Matters on TikTok, except that I haven't posted in a really long time because I've been dealing with mental issues. So maybe you'll see me there eventually.
You can find
you, Christian.
Yeah, you can find me at Truth Voyager on TikTok. And I haven't posted in a while either. If you want to really follow somebody that posts often, follow Micah. He is at Pondering Together on TikTok.
True.
But we also have our podcast TikTok, which I also haven't posted on in a while. That's the Morning Ponderings TikTok. You can find the video game that I made called Zompao 2 on the App Store and Google Play. Links are in the description. And we'll probably have some resources in the description too. Please leave a comment if you liked if you have anything you want to add to this conversation on the YouTube version of this. And leave a review on whatever podcast platform you might be listening on. That'd be very helpful as well. So yeah, you guys have a great one.
Yeah. See you later, Christian.
See you, Josiah. It was nice talking to
you. Nice talking to you too.
Bye.
Have a good day.
All right. Good morning, listeners. My name is Christian.
And I'm Josiah.
And welcome to the Morning Ponderings.
Sorry, I thought that I was supposed to say that. And
you were, and I didn't trust you. I'm sorry I didn't trust you.
It's okay. I also didn't trust myself.